On a plane, the survivors gave each other permission for anyone to eat their bodies after death. The young women on board gathered their lipsticks and nail polish and began writing SOS on the roof of the plane. The co-pilot said there was a gun in a nearby bag. He told them to take it out and shoot him. Some people started eating the leather seat covers. It was night, snow was falling all around, and the temperature was 0 degrees. This is the story of Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, later known as the Miracle of the Andes. October 12, 1972. A small chartered aircraft took off from Uruguay, South America, heading to Santiago, the capital of Chile. On board were rugby players along with some family and friends, 45 passengers in total. The flight usually takes only 3 hours, but the route crosses the Andes, the world's longest mountain range. At 3:21 p.m., while descending near Santiago, the plane suddenly hit terrible turbulence. Clouds surrounded it, visibility dropped to 0, and alarms began flashing. The pilots pushed for maximum altitude, but it was too late. The rear of the aircraft struck the mountain and tore off completely 2 rows of seats, with 3 passengers still in them, were flung out and disappeared. The plane kept climbing for a few seconds, then plummeted. A second collision broke off the left wing, throwing out more passengers. Only the front section remained, and it slid down a glacier at 350 km/h, dropping 700 meters before crashing to a stop. The cockpit was crushed, and both pilots died instantly. The wreck lay on an unknown Andes mountain at 3,570 meters, 80 kilometers off its planned route. Yet astonishingly, 33 of the 45 people aboard were still alive. 2 survivors with minor injuries immediately began checking on the others. Within an hour, Chile's Air Search and Rescue Service was notified. Aircraft searched from dusk until night, but found nothing. Listening to the radio transmissions, rescue officers concluded the plane must have gone down in a remote, inaccessible area, and since the fuselage was white, it was nearly invisible against the snow and ice. That night, 5 of the injured died from their wounds in the cold. The number of survivors fell from 33 to 28. The rest sealed the plane's broken rear with luggage, seats, and snow to shelter from the freezing wind. On October 14th, 11 aircraft from Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay searched the correct area directly over the crash site, but still couldn't spot the wreck against the white landscape. Survivors tried writing SOS in lipstick on the roof but ran out of lipstick before finishing the letters. They then arranged suitcases into a large cross in the snow, hoping search planes would notice. That day, 3 separate aircraft flew directly overhead. The survivors screamed and waved frantically, but none of the pilots saw them. On October 15th, survivor Fito Strauch rigged a metal sheet as a solar water collector, melting snow into empty wine bottles. Others used seat cushions as snowshoes and seat cover wool for warmth. On October 16th, Fernando Parado woke from his coma to learn his mother had died and his sister was gravely injured. He cared for her until she died 8 days later. Most passengers were from coastal Uruguay and had never seen snow before. Now they faced 30 degrees Celsius at high altitude with almost no food or water. On October 21st, 8 days in official search efforts were called off after 142 hours with no sign of survivors. The radio it had could only receive signals. It could not transmit them. The news devastated them. Some wept, others prayed. Supplies were minimal from the start. A few chocolate bars, a tin of mussels, some jam, almonds, peanuts, dates, dried plums, and wine. They rationed obsessively. Pareto once stretched a single chocolate-covered peanut over 3 days. At an altitude of 3,800 meters, there were no plants or animals to find. By the 11th day, food ran out entirely. Some tried eating leather and cotton from the seats, which only made them sick. Facing starvation, with no plants, animals, or supplies left at that altitude, the survivors made an agonizing decision: to eat the flesh of those who had died in the crash. It was an unbearable choice since most of the dead were their own friends, teammates, and relatives. Several others refused at first, but 2 days later, with no other way to survive, they too chose to eat human flesh. On October 29th, 16 days after the crash, they heard a loud grumble in the night. An avalanche. A huge mass of snow came down the mountain and filled the broken plane, burying everyone inside. 8 more people suffocated in their sleep, leaving only 19 survivors. When they finally emerged, it was clear no one was coming to rescue them. If they wanted to live, they'd have to save themselves. Canessa, Parado, and Vizintin, among the fittest, were given extra food and the warmest clothing to attempt an expedition for help. Based on the co-pilot's last known position, they believed walking west would lead them to Chile within days. In reality, the crash site was 89 kilometers east into the heart of the Andes. Their estimate was badly wrong. On November 15th, the trio set out and found the plane's detached tail section, which contained suitcases, chocolate, meat, rum, and, crucially, the aircraft's two-way radio and batteries. But the radio wasn't working. They had no choice left but to walk. On December 11th, another avalanche killed 3 more survivors, leaving 16. To endure the freezing nights ahead, 18-year-old Carlos Miguel Rodriguez, who'd learned to sew from his mother, stitched together scraps of fabric and insulation into a makeshift sleeping bag. Parado layered 3 pairs of jeans, 3 sweaters, and 4 pairs of socks with plastic bags over them against the cold. Each day they inched forward through thin air and exhaustion. Each night the 3 of them crammed into the single sleeping bag. By the 4th day, they realized their route estimate was far worse than expected. The terrain stretched on with no end in sight. With very little food left, Vizintin turned back, sliding down to the crash site in just an hour, using a broken aircraft seat as a sled, a descent that had taken 3 full days to climb. Parado and Canessa pressed on alone. After 3 more hours of climbing, they finally reached the peak and looked around, only to see mountains and snow-covered peaks stretching 360 degrees to the horizon in every direction. Instead of the green valleys of Chile they had hoped for, there was nothing but an endless white wilderness. Refusing to give up, they scanned the horizon and finally spotted 2 distant peaks without snow and set off toward them. After 9 grueling days of trekking, on December 20th, they finally saw signs of life. Cattle in a field, and across a river, 3 men on horseback. Too far for their shouts to carry over the rushing water, one rider noticed them anyway and called back that he'd return the next day. He came back with paper and pencil tied to a stone and threw it across the river. Parado wrote a note in Spanish explaining they were from a plane that had crashed in the mountains, that they'd been walking for 10 days, and that injured survivors remained at the crash site in urgent need of help. The writer was a Chilean farmer, Sergio Catalan. He and his companions vaguely recalled hearing about a plane crash months earlier and were stunned that anyone could still be alive. Catalan tossed bread across the river, then rode 10 hours west to alert authorities, eventually reaching Army Command in Santiago. Farmers brought Parado and Canessa to the village of Los Maitenes to rest. They had hiked 61 kilometers on foot over 10 days. Canessa now weighed just 44 kg, having lost roughly half his body weight. The story broke internationally within hours. The Chilean Air Force dispatched helicopters. Using the pilot's flight chart, on which he'd plotted their route, Parado guided the rescue team by air to the crash site. On December 22, 1972, 70 days after the crash, helicopters finally reached the remaining survivors. In total, 16 people were rescued alive, suffering from altitude sickness, dehydration, broken bones, and severe malnutrition. But all of them recovered. Their story became known as the Miracle of the Andes, a testament to how far human will and endurance can carry people, even in the most desperate circumstances. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to the channel.